Find a comfortable position. Let your body relax. Take one slow breath in and let it go. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing to do. Just rest and let the story carry you gently away. Before we begin, there is something you should know about today. This morning, at some point today, you said the word Thursday, or Wednesday, or Friday. And when you said those words, you were, without knowing it, speaking the names of Viking gods. Thursday is Thor's day. Wednesday is Woden's day, Odin's day. Friday belongs to Freya, the Norse goddess of love and fate. You have been saying Viking prayers every single week of your life. That is not a coincidence. It is an inheritance, and it is much closer than you think. There is a 1 in 3 chance, if your ancestors came from Britain, Ireland, northern France, or anywhere in the northern half of Europe, that you carry Norse DNA right now. Not metaphorically, in your blood, in your cells, in the biological sequence that makes you the specific person you are. The Vikings did not disappear. They dissolved into the population of the Western world, and most of their descendants are walking around today having no idea. Here is something else you were probably not taught in school. In the year 1000 CE, 500 years before Christopher Columbus was born, a Norse explorer named Leif Eriksson stepped onto the soil of what is now Newfoundland, Canada. He called it Vinland. His settlement was real. In 1960, archaeologists found it. We have the physical evidence. The history you learned about who discovered America was quietly, consistently incomplete. Tonight, we are going to walk through the world the Vikings actually lived in. Not the one from movies. The horned helmets were mostly wrong, by the way, but the real one. The one that was sophisticated and brutal and funny and strange and full of ideas that your civilization is still using. There are 3 women somewhere in the Norse cosmos who are weaving your fate as you listen to this. According to the Vikings, they have been weaving it since before you were born. We will come to them. Find a comfortable position. The longship is waiting. The cold hits you first. Not the gentle cold of an air-conditioned room, but the real cold. The kind that gets into your lungs when you breathe and reminds you that your body is a warm thing moving through a world that is mostly not. The North Sea in early morning in the year 950 CE is gray-green and serious, and the wind comes off it with the blunt honesty of something that has traveled a very long way without obstruction. You are on a longship. It is 25 meters long, built from overlapping oak planks that flex slightly with the waves. A design choice, not a flaw. The flexibility makes the hull stronger under stress, distributes force rather than resisting it. Viking shipbuilders understood structural engineering 14 centuries before modern materials science named it. The ship sits remarkably low in the water. This is also intentional. The longship's shallow draft, less than a meter, means it can navigate rivers. The same vessel that crosses the North Atlantic can sail up the Seine to Paris, up the Thames to London, up the Volga to the Caspian Sea. The Vikings had not just built a boat, they had built access to the entire known world. There are 16 men rowing in shifts. They are not all warriors. The man to your left is a farmer from a valley in Norway. He grows barley and keeps sheep, and and spends most of his year doing the quiet, detailed work of keeping a family fed in a climate that is not generous. He is on this voyage because the farm cannot currently support a fourth son, and because there is silver to be had, and because, and this part is rarely discussed, because the sagas he heard as a child made the sea sound like the only place where a fourth son could become something. He is not a monster. He is an economic migrant with a weapon. The sun breaks the horizon. The water turns gold for a moment. The man to your left watches it and says something to himself in Old Norse. Later, you will learn it means good. Here's what they did not tell you. 90% of the people the Norse called themselves, and they did not actually call themselves Vikings. That word referred specifically to people who went on raids, not an entire culture. 90% of them never raided anyone. They farmed, they fished, they kept livestock, they traded, they raised children and argued with neighbors and attended the thing, the community assembly, and went home and made dinner. The word Viking comes from the Old Norse vik, meaning inlet or bay, and referred to the act of going out on expeditions, usually seasonal. A man could be a Viking in summer and a farmer in winter. It was a job description, not an identity. The identity was Norse. And the Norse world was not primarily a world of violence. It was a world of extraordinary mobility. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Norse traders built a network that ran from Greenland in the west to Constantinople in the east, from the Arctic Circle in the north to the cities of the Islamic Caliphate in the south. They traded furs, amber, slaves, and timber. They brought back silver, silk, spices, and glassware. Norse coins have been found in Afghanistan. Norse jewelry has been found in Baghdad. A Norse comb was discovered in Ireland. A Norse sword was found in a river in England with an Arabic inscription on the blade. The Vikings were not outside the global economy of their time. They were, in several important ways, running it. The silver they accumulated, in hoards buried across Britain, Ireland, and Scandinavia, represents some of the largest concentrations of early medieval wealth ever found. In 2014, a metal detectorist in Scotland found the Galloway hoard. Over 100 silver objects, gold jewelry, and artifacts from as far away as Asia, buried by someone who apparently never came back to retrieve it. Whatever happened to them, their silver is still there. You walk into the thing. It is held in an open field, always an open field, never a building. Because the Norse believed that decisions made in the open, under the sky, with everyone watching, were more honest than decisions made behind closed doors. This particular thing, the Althing of Iceland, has been meeting every June since 930 CE. It is the oldest functioning parliament in the world. Iceland's parliament is still called the Althing today. The continuity is unbroken. Every free man in the district has the right to speak. The chieftain presides, but his job is to manage the process, not to dictate the outcome. Decisions are made by consensus, ratified by the assembled crowd who signal approval by clashing their weapons, a sound like brief thunder, quickly over. Women cannot vote, but they can attend, and their opinions carry social weight that formal process doesn't capture. The Norse were not democrats in the modern sense. Slaves existed. Women were property in some legal contexts. The powerful had advantages, the powerless did not. But within those limitations, the system they built had a remarkable insistence on process, on the idea that authority needed to be argued for publicly in front of people who could disagree. The man who speaks too long at the thing is interrupted. The man who lies at the thing loses credibility that money cannot buy back. The man who refuses to attend is considered, at minimum, unsociable, and at maximum, a coward. The decisions made here today, a property dispute between two farmers, a question about what to do with a man who killed a neighbor's dog, a planned trading expedition that needs volunteers, the possibility of whether to change the route of a shared path. Governance, in other words, the dull, essential work of people deciding how to live near each other. The field is full. A child near you is half asleep against her father's arm, lulled by the sound of voices and the smell of grass. The Althing will run for 2 weeks. There is no rush. The Norse word for luck and the Norse word for money are the same word, Hamingja. This is not an accident. The Norse did not separate good fortune from material wealth the way later Christian culture encouraged. To be prosperous was to be in right relationship with the world. To have silver was evidence that the world was returning your efforts appropriately. Poverty was not virtuous. Generosity with wealth was hoarding was considered worse than spending, but the accumulation of wealth was not a moral problem. It was a sign that you were doing something right. This shaped everything about how the Norse moved through the world. The trading routes they established, the Varangian route running from the Baltic down through Russia to Constantinople, the Atlantic route running from Norway along the British coast to France and the Mediterranean, were not secondary to their raiding activity. They were primary. Most Norse expeditions that left Scandinavia were trading expeditions. The raiding was, in economic terms, supplementary income. In Constantinople, which the Norse called Miklager, the great city, Norse warriors served as the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. The Varangian guard was elite, well-paid, and deeply trusted, precisely because they were foreigners with no local political allegiances. Byzantine emperors discovered that the most reliable men in a palace full of plotting Romans were the large northerners who couldn't read Greek and didn't care about court politics. They cared about silver. The emperor could provide silver. The arrangement worked for 3 centuries. You are standing in a market in Birka, Sweden, in 900 CE, watching a Norse merchant weigh Arabic dirhams on a small scale. The coins came from Samarkand. They passed through a dozen hands before reaching this market stall. The merchant has no idea where Samarkand is. He knows the weight of the silver and the quality of the silver. He knows the furs in his pack are worth a specific number of these coins. He is, by the standards of his time, cosmopolitan. You eat. The meal is served in a longhouse, a long rectangular building with a fire running down the center, benches along both walls, a roof hole above that lets out smoke in theory and lets in weather in practice. The fire is the heart of the house in both the functional and the emotional sense. Everything happens near it. The food is better than you expected. Rye bread, dense, chewy, more nutritious than modern white bread, with a slight sourness from the fermentation process used to leaven it. Skyr, which is a fermented dairy product halfway between yogurt and soft cheese served with dried berries. Dried and salted fish, cod, herring, eel, which is not elegant but is extremely effective at keeping a person alive through a long winter. Barley porridge with butter and honey. There is mead, honey wine, served in wooden cups, drunk in quantities that suggest either a high tolerance or a long night ahead. Possibly both. The Norse relationship with food was practical in a way that modern abundance has made almost impossible to recreate. They ate what they could preserve. They preserved what they had in summer. Winter was a calculation. How much did you put aside? How many mouths needed feeding? How long until spring? A bad harvest was not an inconvenience. It was an existential problem. This made the Norse extremely good at preparation and deeply suspicious of waste. A person who wasted food was, in practical terms, stealing from their own winter. The man next to you at the bench is eating efficiently and without ceremony. He finishes, thanks the host with a specific phrase you cannot translate but recognize as formal, and moves to the edge of the firelight. The longhouse is warm. The fire settles. Outside, the wind is doing what northern wind does, which is everything simultaneously for a long time. In the morning, a man scratches something into a piece of wood with a knife. You watch him for a moment and assume it is something important, a contract, perhaps, or a prayer. When you eventually find someone who can read the runes and ask what it says, the answer is, "I carved this stick. Sigurd made this." It is essentially a receipt, or a signature, or possibly a joke. The interpretation is contested. This is the thing about runes that the movies get wrong. They are, first and most practically, an alphabet. The Elder Futhark, the original runic script, was a functional writing system developed around the 2nd century CE, used for carving into hard surfaces like wood, bone, stone, and metal. It was designed for scratching, not ink, which is why the letters have no horizontal lines. Horizontal lines are hard to carve against wood grain. The Norse used runes to label their possessions, record agreements, mark graves, and, yes, to attempt magic. The magical use was real and was taken seriously. Certain combinations of runes were believed to have power, to heal, to protect, to harm. A curse carved in runes and buried under an enemy's threshold was not superstition to the person who buried it. It was technology. The distinction between magic and practical use was not clear to the Norse because they did not maintain it. The rune that marked your ownership of a knife was the same symbol that, in a different arrangement, might protect you in battle. The difference was context and intent, not the symbol itself. Odin, in the mythology, hung himself upside down on Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and 9 nights, without food or water, to discover the runes. He sacrificed himself to himself, the myths say, to gain the knowledge of writing. They considered writing important enough to require that kind of story to explain its origin. The man with the stick finishes his carving, looks at it briefly, and puts it in his pack. There is a category of Norse warrior that appears in the sagas as something between a soldier and a force of nature. The Berserkers. Their name comes from bear shirt, the animal hide they wore into battle. The sagas describe them fighting in a state of uncontrolled rage, immune to pain, impervious to weapons, howling and biting their shields, falling into a trance that made them something other than ordinary men. They are, depending on your source, warriors touched by Odin, or madmen, or both. Modern historians and anthropologists have proposed several explanations. One theory: Berserkers consumed fly-agaric mushrooms, the red and white ones that appear in fairy tales, before battle, producing a dissociative, hallucinogenic state that genuinely altered pain perception. Another theory: the state was self-induced through extreme physical and psychological conditioning, a form of combat trance that trained warriors could enter deliberately. A third theory: the sagas exaggerated, and berserkers were simply very aggressive men who fought with exceptional ferocity. What is not in dispute: the berserkers were real. They appear in historical sources outside the sagas, including Byzantine records of the Varangian Guard, which noted that certain Norse warriors fought with an unusual disregard for their own safety. The Byzantine military manuals recommended specific tactics for engaging them. They were also, outside of battle, extraordinarily difficult to live with. The sagas are full of accounts of berserkers causing trouble in peacetime, fighting at feasts, threatening civilians, generally being ungovernable. Several sagas have plots that essentially amount to someone needs to kill this berserker before he kills everyone. The Icelandic Commonwealth eventually outlawed the berserker state in ordinary circumstances. You could still be a ferocious warrior, but deliberately entering the battle trance in a civilian context became a punishable offense. Even Viking society had limits. The fire in the longhouse pops and settles. You breathe slowly. There is a detail about Viking society that tends to surprise modern readers who have absorbed the movies. The women were not quiet. Norse law, at least in Iceland and Scandinavia, before Christian legal codes replaced Norse ones, gave women a set of rights that would not be matched in most of Europe until the 19th century. A Norse woman could own property in her own name. She could divorce her husband. She could initiate the divorce simply by declaring it in front of witnesses. No court, no process, no permission required. She could conduct trade. She could speak at the thing. The key around her neck was not decorative, it was functional. She controlled the household stores, the food, the valuables, the locked chests that represented the family's wealth. To take the key was to give someone the house, literally. That key was a symbol of authority that everyone understood. The shield maiden, the female warrior, appears in the sagas frequently enough to be taken seriously. For a long time, modern historians assumed these were mythological figures, narrative inventions, heroic archetypes. Then, in 2017, a Viking-era grave in Birka, Sweden, was definitively genetically identified as female. The grave contained a full military kit: sword, armor, 2 horses, a game board for strategic planning. The occupant had been buried as a high-ranking warrior commander. The game board is the detail that keeps researchers awake. A sword is personal equipment. A game board used for tactical planning suggests a leadership role, someone who planned battles, not just fought in them. She had a name. We don't know it. The sagas sometimes name women who fought. There is a category of story, not many, but not none, that involves a woman who picks up a weapon because the situation required it and no man was available or willing. Some of them won. Here's the problem the Norse were trying to solve. How do you build a warrior culture if warriors are afraid to die? The answer was Valhalla. Valhalla, Valhell in Old Norse, the Hall of the Slain, is Odin's hall in Asgard, the realm of the gods. Warriors who die in battle, who die well, fighting, with a weapon in their hand, are chosen by the Valkyries, the warrior women who ride above battlefields, selecting the honored dead, and carried to Valhalla. There they feast, fight, and prepare for Ragnarök, the final battle at the end of the world. This is not a consolation prize. In Norse cosmology, it is the best possible outcome. Better than dying of illness, better than dying old in bed, better than dying without having been tested. The warrior who fears death is paralyzed. The warrior who believes that death in battle is a promotion to a better hall, better food, eternal company of the best fighters who ever lived, is functionally fearless. The Norse did not eliminate the fear of death. They reframed it. This is not unique to them. Most warrior cultures develop some version of this technology. What is notable about the Norse version is how concrete and vivid it was. Valhalla was not an abstraction. It had a specific address, Asgard, a specific resident host, Odin, a specific meal, the boar Sehrimnir, who regenerates every night so there is always enough, and specific activities, fighting all day, feasting all night, doing it again tomorrow. It was designed to be appealing. Specifically appealing to the kind of person who enjoyed fighting and eating and did not want to stop. The genius of it was not theological, it was psychological. The Viking warrior facing a shield wall did not need faith. He needed a clear mental image of what came next. Valhalla provided that image in extraordinary detail. The fire is low, the meat is almost gone, the night deepens around the longhouse. Beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, the ash whose branches extend through all 9 worlds, there is a well. At the well sit 3 women. Their names are Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. They are the Norns, and they have been there since before the gods existed. They spin the threads of fate and weave them on a loom whose scale you cannot quite see. Every thread is a life. The pattern they are making encompasses all of history, past and future simultaneously. Urd governs what has already happened. Verdandi governs what is happening now. Skuld governs what is yet to come, but not in the sense of prediction. Skuld's threads are not yet finished. They are being made. The future, in Norse cosmology, is not fixed. It is being woven in real time by forces that respond to what the living do. This is the part that distinguishes Norse fate from simple determinism. The Norns do not predetermine your life and then watch it unfold. They weave as you live. Your choices are threads they incorporate. The pattern changes as you act. Modern psychology might recognize this as something close to the therapeutic model of narrative, the idea that your life is a story that you are simultaneously living and authoring, that agency and circumstance are both real, and that neither completely explains the other. The Norse arrived at this position through myth. The thing that the Norns weave for you tonight is sleep. The specific quality of sleep that comes after a long day of something real, work that mattered, a problem solved, a distance traveled. The thread they are adding right now, if the pattern of tonight is going according to what Skuld has been preparing, is the thread of rest. You do not need to do anything for this. You only need to let the loom work. The well beneath the roots is very quiet. The Norns do not speak as they work. They have never needed to. In the year 1000 CE, a man named Leif Eriksson left Greenland heading west. He was not the first. His father, Eric the Red, had discovered Greenland. A merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson had reportedly seen a landmass further west while blown off course but had not landed. Leif went to look. What he found, a land with wild grapes, self-sown wheat, and forests of lumber, all things that Greenland lacked and desperately needed. He named it Vinland. He stayed for a winter. He built houses. His crew was small, the sagas say around 35 people, and the land was clearly inhabited by people he called Skrallings, the Norse word for foreigners. He left. Others came after him. His brother Thorvald came and was killed by an arrow. Thorfinn Karlsefni came with 160 people and tried to establish a permanent settlement. He lasted 3 years before conflicts with the indigenous inhabitants made the settlement untenable. The Norse withdrew. For the next 9 centuries, the story of Vinland existed only in the Icelandic sagas. 2 documents, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, which were treated by most European historians as legend or exaggeration. The Norse had no reason to write history. They were not sure anyone would believe. The sagas recorded it because the sagas recorded everything. In 1960, A Norwegian archaeologist named Helge Ingstad and his wife Anne Steen followed the descriptions in the sagas to a place called Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. They found 8 buildings, Norse-style construction, carbon dated to approximately 1000 CE. A bronze pin of a type used exclusively in Scandinavia. Iron nails smelted in a specific way only the Norse did. The settlement was real. The history books took another decade to fully acknowledge it. 500 years. Someone was carrying a story the official record didn't want to tell. Here is a fact that the monks who wrote most of what we know about the Vikings did not particularly want to include, but which appears in enough independent sources that historians accept it. The Norse bathed regularly. Every Saturday, they had a word for it, Laugardagur, bathing day. The day was named after the activity, which tells you how seriously they took it. In Old Norse communities, the Saturday bath was not optional. It was a social obligation. You showed up clean to your community. You did not show up smelling like someone who considered bathing an eccentricity. The monks who wrote most of the early medieval accounts of Norse people as savage and unwashed were writing in a cultural tradition that considered regular bathing somewhat suspect, associated with Roman decadence, or with Moorish practice, or with a kind of excessive concern for the body that distracted from the soul. Some monastic orders had complex rules about how often washing was permissible. The Norse had no such ambivalence. They had combs, found in Norse graves across Europe, in Ireland and Britain, as well as Scandinavia. They had tweezers, ear spoons. They groomed. The archaeological record of personal hygiene equipment from Norse sites consistently outpaces comparable medieval European sites from the same period. The account of a 10th century Arab traveler named Ibrahim ibn Yaqub, who encountered Norse people in Hedeby, described them as clean and fond of eye makeup, which he found surprising and a little unsettling. He expected barbarians. He found people with good personal hygiene and a fondness for coal. The record notes that Norse men were considered extremely attractive by the local European women they encountered, a fact that irritated contemporary English clergymen enough to write about it. Clean hair, regular baths, Saturday. You have been naming that day after the same concept ever since. The Norse healer was called a Leifjamadr, a medicine man or woman, and the practice of Norse medicine is one of the more surprising things you encounter when you actually look at the historical record. They used willow bark for pain and fever. We now know willow bark contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin. They used it for the same things we use aspirin for, and it worked for the same reasons, and they had no idea why. They used garlic as an antibiotic packed into wounds. They used plantain, a common weed, as an anti-inflammatory. They used honey as a wound dressing, which is so effective against bacterial infection that modern medicine has revived the practice under the name medical honey therapy. They also used magic. The two things were not separated. A Norse healer treating a sword wound would clean the wound, pack it with honey, recite a specific formula of words, and carve a protective rune onto a piece of wood to be kept near the patient. Whether the rune worked is a question outside the scope of this story. The honey worked, the garlic worked, the willow bark worked. The wound, in a surprising number of cases, healed. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, the battle that effectively ended the Viking Age in England, a wounded Norse warrior was treated in the field by a woman whose name the sources do not record. She packed his abdominal wound with a specific mixture of herbs and broth, and told the watching men they could assess how deep the wound was by the smell of the broth as it passed through. If it smelled of garlic and herbs from the outside of the wound, the injury had perforated the intestine, and he would not survive. This is functionally a correct diagnostic technique for intestinal perforation. She knew this in 1066. The question that puzzled historians for a long time was simple. How? How did the Norse navigate? They crossed the North Atlantic, 3,000 kilometers of open ocean with no landmarks, in boats with no compasses. On overcast days, which are frequent in the North Atlantic, they could not see the sun or the stars. They should have been sailing blind. The sagas mentioned in passing something called a solarstein, a sunstone. For centuries, this was assumed to be mythological, another saga invention. Then, in 2013, researchers examining the wreck of a 16th century British ship found a piece of Iceland spar, a translucent form of calcite crystal, in the navigator's chest. Iceland spar has a property called birefringence. It polarizes light in a way that allows you to locate the sun's position even through complete cloud cover. Hold it up, rotate it slowly, and at a specific angle, two images of the sky align. That alignment points to the sun. With the sun's position, you have a bearing. The Norse, it appears, had discovered optical polarimetry approximately 800 years before Western science formally described it. They also used birds, releasing them at sea to watch which direction they flew toward land. They used ocean swell patterns which change predictably near coastlines. They used the migration routes of whales. They used smell. The specific cold salt algae smell of the open ocean changes as you approach land, and experienced sailors could detect the difference. None of these are navigation in the modern sense. All of them combined are navigation in a very real sense. The Norse crossing of the North Atlantic was not luck. It was accumulated observational knowledge carried in the memory of experienced sailors, passed from person to person across generations. The ship under you knows where it is going. The man at the helm has made this crossing before. The Norse believed the world would end. They knew how. They knew when, more or less. And they built their entire culture around the fact that this was going to happen, and that the correct response was to fight anyway. Ragnarök, the doom of the gods, is a specific sequence of events. A great winter that lasts 3 years with no summer between them, the breaking of all bonds and all oaths, a flood that covers the earth, then a battle in which Odin is killed by the wolf Fenrir, Thor is killed by the Midgard serpent, and most of the gods die. Then the world sinks into the sea, and then it rises again, new and clean. A hall that survived, grain that grows without having been seeded. The surviving gods finding the game pieces from before the flood, golden, half buried in the grass. Modern astronomers have noted that the 3-year winter described in Ragnarök, called Fimbulwinter, is consistent with the effects of a major volcanic eruption on a scale capable of causing global temperature drops. Such events have occurred. The eruption of Eldgjá in Iceland around 939 CE caused a decade of climate disruption across the northern hemisphere. The Norse would have experienced this as a world that was dying. The myth of Ragnarök may have been, in part, a memory, a cultural record of a real catastrophe, encoded in narrative to be carried forward by people who had survived it. What they added, the renewal, the new world rising from the old, was not wishful thinking, it was wisdom. The world had ended before, in their experience, it had come back. The lesson they drew was not despair. The lesson was, even if everything falls, something remains. And then you begin again. In the peat bogs of Denmark, Germany, Ireland, and Britain, the earth has been keeping secrets for 2,000 years. The bog bodies are preserved human remains, hundreds of them, recovered over the past 3 centuries, whose skin, hair, and often facial features have been maintained by the specific chemistry of the peat. Acidic, cold, oxygen-poor, conditions that should cause rapid decomposition instead produce something closer to tanning. Some of the bodies look like they could have been buried last week. Tollen man, found in Denmark in 1950, had been hanged. The rope was still around his neck. His expression was peaceful. He had eaten a meal of grain porridge and wild seeds the morning he died. He was around 40 years old. His death, the archaeologists concluded, was deliberate, ritual rather than criminal, based on the care with which his body had been placed in the bog. Lindo man, found in England in 1984, had been killed 3 times, hit on the head, strangled, and had his throat cut. His last meal was unleavened bread with traces of specific plants that may have been chosen deliberately. He had been in good health before his death. His fingernails were manicured. The pattern across many of the bog bodies suggests not punishment, but sacrifice. The deliberate offering of a specific kind of person in a specific way to the water. The bogs were liminal places in Celtic and Germanic cosmology, neither land nor water, neither one world nor the other. They were the edges of things, and edges were where you left offerings. The thing about the offerings is that whoever left them never came back to retrieve them. Whatever they were asking for, rain, protection, victory, the end of a hard winter, they gave what they had and walked away. The bog kept everything. There is a pattern in history that keeps repeating itself, and once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. In 1562, a Spanish friar burned 27 Maya books in an afternoon. In the centuries following the fall of the Library of Alexandria, an estimated 90% of ancient Greek texts were lost to war, fire, neglect, and the decisions of people who found the old knowledge inconvenient. In the Norse case, the mechanism was slower but equally thorough. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, arriving first in Denmark around 960 CE, reaching Norway by 1000 CE, Iceland by legal decree in the same year, it brought with it a systematic project of replacing Norse religious practice with Christian practice. This was partly violent, partly economic, partly administrative. The Norse did not all convert by choice. Many were converted by kings who had political reasons to align with the church and who encouraged or required conversion among their subjects. The oral tradition, the skalds, the poets who carried the myths and histories in memorized verse, gradually lost their audience and their patrons. New poetry was Christian poetry. Old poetry was, at best, entertainment, and at worst, paganism. What survives is a fraction. The prose Edda and poetic Edda, collected and written down by an Icelandic scholar named Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, are the primary sources for Norse mythology as we know it. Snorri was a Christian. He was writing about a belief system he considered superseded. He preserved what he preserved because he found it historically and poetically interesting, not because he thought it was true. We know Norse mythology because one Christian scholar in Iceland found it worth saving. Everything else, the full scope of what a living pagan Norse tradition knew about the world, is gone. The runes that were carved into wood have rotted. The songs that were not written down were not written down. The silence where that knowledge used to be is very large. The Viking Age ended quietly, not with a battle, or rather not just with a battle, but with a set of gradual changes that made the conditions that produced the Viking Age disappear. The last major Norse raid on England is generally dated to 1066, though the actual last raid was probably later and unrecorded. But 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and 3 weeks later, the Battle of Hastings, represents the end of an era in a way that felt real to the people who lived through it. At Stamford Bridge, King Harold of England defeated and killed Harald Hardrada of Norway, the last of the great Viking kings in the Old Mold. Harald Hardrada had sailed to England with 300 ships. He arrived with the confidence of a man who understood that the Norse had been raiding England successfully for 270 years. He died 3 weeks before the Normans arrived. The Normans, incidentally, were Norse. The name means Northmen. They were the descendants of Viking settlers in northern France who had adopted French language and customs and then invaded England anyway, 2.5 centuries after their ancestors had first raided it. By 1066, several things had changed. Scandinavian kingdoms had consolidated. Kings preferred taxation to raiding, more reliable income, less dangerous, better for long-term political stability. Christianity had spread, bringing with it institutional infrastructure that made mobile piracy less compatible with political legitimacy. The easy targets, undefended monasteries full of gold and no standing army, had been replaced by fortified towns and organized defenses specifically designed to counter longship raids. The Vikings didn't stop because they ran out of ferocity. They stopped because the world changed around them, and they changed with it. They became traders, settlers, farmers. They became the ancestors of the people who eventually stopped remembering them. The longship was hauled out of the water for the last time, and nobody wrote down the day. In 2020, a genetic study of the modern population of the British Isles found that approximately 6% of the current population of England carries direct Norse Y chromosome ancestry. In the Orkney Islands, off the northern tip of Scotland, which were Norse territory from the 9th century until 1468, the number is over 25%. A broader study of northwestern European populations found Norse genetic markers in populations across Britain, Ireland, France, and even Russia, corresponding to the historical extent of Norse settlement and trade routes. This is ancestry in the biological sense, which is one kind of real. But the Norse legacy runs through other channels too. The English language contains more than 2,000 words of Old Norse origin. Sky is Norse. Window is Norse, from Vindauga, wind-eye. Ugly is Norse. Awkward is Norse. Husband, wife, birth, dirt, egg, knife, law, Norse. The legal concept of bylaw, a local regulation, comes from the Norse word for a settlement. The concept of due process in English common law, the idea that accusations must be proven, that the accused has the right to answer, that judgments must be reached through established procedure, has roots in the Thing tradition, in the Norse insistence that authority be publicly argued rather than privately decided. You have been speaking Norse. You have been living in a legal system that remembers Norse. You possibly have Norse cells. The culture you are inside has a Norse skeleton that was built 1,000 years ago and has been inside every structure built since. None of this was in the history class, but it was always there. Let me tell you about your week. Monday, Moon's Day. Manadag, the day of the moon. Tuesday, Tyr's Day, the Norse god of law and justice who sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir. Wednesday, Woden's Day, Odin, the Allfather, the god of wisdom and war and poetry and death. Thursday, Thor's day, the thunderer with his hammer. Friday, Freya's day, or possibly Frigg's day, the Norse goddess of love and domestic life and fate. 5 of your 7 days of the week carry Norse or related Germanic divine names. You say them without thinking. They are so embedded in how you organize time that removing them would require you to rebuild the basic rhythm of your week from scratch. Your months are different, those are Roman, but your week is Norse. The Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday sequence is a sequence of Norse gods so consistent across Northern European languages that it tells you exactly how far Norse culture spread and how deeply it penetrated the calendrical systems of the world that replaced it. The Norse also gave English the words it uses for directions. East comes from a word related to the dawn. North comes from a Germanic root related to the left when facing east. These are practical observations about the sky encoded into language and then forgotten as practical observations while surviving as words. You navigate, you name the days, you schedule the week, you say law and sky and egg and window. Every day you do this, you are using the intellectual infrastructure of people who crossed the North Atlantic in wooden ships, who hung themselves upside down to learn the alphabet, who named their daughters after goddesses and their sons after gods, and who believed the world would end and begin again, and that the correct response to this was to have another drink and fight anyway. They are not so far away. You are lying in the longhouse now. The fire has burned down to embers. The world the Vikings built is not gone. It is around you in ways that are invisible, precisely because they are structural. The way a foundation is invisible once the building stands on top of it. The Parliament of Iceland is the direct institutional descendant of the Althing of 930 CE. The concept of common law, the legal tradition of Britain and America and Canada and Australia, carries within it the Norse insistence that law must be spoken publicly, argued openly, applied consistently. The word law itself is Norse. So is outlaw, a person cast outside the protection of the law, which was a formal Norse legal category. The design of the longship influenced shipbuilding across Europe for centuries. The overlapping plank construction, the flexible hull, the shallow draft, these innovations spread through contact and imitation and appear in vessels far from Scandinavia. The trading networks the Norse established became the arteries of medieval European commerce. The Varangian route through Russia became the basis of the trade connections between Northern Europe and Byzantium and the Islamic world. The amber roads, the fur roads, the silver roads, they outlasted the Norse as a distinct political entity and continued functioning under other names and other operators. And then there is this, the sagas. 1200 years after they were composed, the Icelandic family sagas are still read. They are studied in universities. They are cited in discussions of narrative technique. They introduce the convention of telling a story from the inside, from the perspective of the characters living it, without authorial intervention or moral explanation, that eventually became the default mode of the Western novel. The saga writers invented something. They didn't know what to call it. We call it psychological realism. Sleep now. The embers are very low. The longship is very still. You are not sure when it stopped moving. At some point, the sea became glass, or perhaps it was always glass, and the motion you felt was your own body adjusting to the stillness. Either way, the ship sits on flat, dark water, and the sound of oars has stopped, and the only sound is the small sound of water against the hull and the occasional shift of someone's weight in the bow. The sky above you is extraordinary. No land, no light, no competition for the stars. They extend from horizon to horizon in a density that the word stars does not capture. A texture of light, layered, deep, the Milky Way a broad irregular band directly overhead. The Norse navigated by this. They read it the way you read a map, except the map covered everything, and you were always inside it. The cold is still present, but has become at some point comfortable rather than threatening. The fur cloak, the wool, the body heat of the people sleeping around you. The ship is warm enough. The cold is outside the warmth, which makes the warmth feel significant. Someone in the stern is keeping watch. You can see the shape of them against the sky, patient, unhurried, not going anywhere. The watch changes every few hours. You will sleep through the change. You won't know who is watching when you wake up, but someone will be. This is the thing about the longship at night. It is complete. Everything needed is here. The ship knows where it is going. The people on it know their jobs. The stars know where the ship is. You can let go of this for a few hours. The water moves very slightly under the hull. Breathe out. At the center of everything, the Norse believed there is a tree, Yggdrasil, the world ash, whose roots reach into 3 wells. The well of wisdom where Odin paid an eye to drink, the well of fate where the Norns draw water, and the spring of Vergelmir where the serpent Nidhugger gnaws at the roots. The branches extend into all 9 worlds, Asgard above, Midgard, the world of humans, in the middle, and the realms of fire, ice, dark elves, dwarves, and the dead arrayed around it. The squirrel Ratatoskr runs up and down the trunk carrying messages between the eagle at the crown and the serpent at the roots. The eagle and the serpent are always in conflict. Ratatoskr, who carries their insults back and forth, actively inflames this conflict for reasons the myth does not explain. He is, apparently, just like that. 4 stags roam the branches eating the new growth. The tree is simultaneously being damaged by the serpent below, by the stags above, by general cosmic entropy, and continuously regenerated by the Norns, who water the roots from the well of fate and pack white clay around the base to keep it strong. The tree does not flourish despite the damage. It flourishes alongside the damage. The gnawing and the tending happen simultaneously, and the tree stands anyway, and in its standing all 9 worlds hold their positions. This is the Norse cosmology in miniature. Things do not work because there are no problems. Things work because there are problems and forces that counter the problems, and the whole assembly keeps going through ongoing effort rather than permanent solution. Your breathing is slower now. The tree is very large. You are very small in relation to it, and this is not frightening, but rather the opposite of frightening. The specific relief of understanding your scale in something much larger and not having to hold it up. The roots go very deep. The watchman at the stern is very still now. You are not sure if he is awake. The stars have shifted. They always shift. The whole sky turning slowly on the fixed point of the pole star like a wheel that never stops. And the horizon to the east has the suggestion, not yet confirmed, of a lightning. Not dawn. The thing before dawn, when the darkness becomes slightly less total and the eye begins to believe that the dark might not last forever. It always does this. The Norse knew this. They had watched this sky every clear night for their entire lives, and the thing before dawn always came, and the dawn always followed, and then the day. The longship is quiet. The water is quiet. You are horizontal, and your breath is very slow, and the fur is warm, and the stars, or what you can see of them from where you are, which is a limited but sufficient view, are doing what they always do, moving very slowly in their ancient patterns, measuring time in a way that makes a human lifetime seem like a single deep breath. The Norns are still at their loom. They work without urgency. The thread for tonight is nearly complete. It is the color of rest, of the specific kind of rest that comes after something real. A crossing made, a distance covered, a fire kept burning through the night. The watchman, you notice, is not looking at the horizon. He is looking at the stars. He knows where you are.